The arrival of 7 guests on The Tonight Show was euphoric. The famous blue curtain sections from The Tonight Show. After delivering his monologue, Johnny Carson walks to his designated spot and sits behind the desk. This ritual was performed with clockwork accuracy for 30 years. The most reliable nighttime comfort on television. However, the unpredictable and occasionally frightening condition of the celebrities waiting anxiously backstage was a chaotic reality that viewers rarely saw behind that well-oiled machine. According to a former Tonight Show producer who collaborated with Carson during the 1970s, Johnny had a sixth sense about it the minute they left. If someone was stoned, drunk, coked up, or worse, he could tell in a matter of seconds. His gaze would become this certain. Here we go, part amusement, part oh God. The reality behind the scenes was frequently much more dramatic, despite Carson's renowned composure on camera. Production assistants received training on how to spot warning indicators. Emergency backup plans were created by segment producers. From time to time, executives hovered anxiously in the wings. According to a former Tonight Show employee, we had code phrases. When Johnny touched his tie to introduce someone, it indicated that the individual was not completely sober. The director was warned to keep camera shots simple because our guest might be unpredictable if he straightened his cards twice. These subliminal cues were a part of a complex system that had been developed over years to deal with a situation that domestic viewers might never have suspected. Major celebrities in states of severe chemical alteration arrive at America's most prestigious talk show. The former producer acknowledged that the 1970s were crazy. Real-life legends, Oscar winners, musical greats, and literary titans would all appear so inebriated that they would hardly recognize themselves. Johnny had to somehow make everything appear normal while essentially watching over someone who was experiencing reality in a completely different way. The most startling was the tale of the adored cultural figure who showed up so obviously intoxicated that NBC executives almost ended the interview in the middle of it, but Carson persuaded them that the audience believed it was all a sophisticated comedy. Alternatively, Carson joked to his crew, "I think I got a contact high just sitting next to him," referring to the counterculture hero whose chemical assistance was so obvious. Let's get pizza for everybody. The most notorious instances of celebrities appearing on The Tonight Show while obviously intoxicated are being uncovered today, along with the amazing ways Johnny Carson handled these erratic, occasionally career-defining situations. Prior to facing the most powerful and widely watched interviewer on television, we must first comprehend the particular pressures that pushed so many celebrities to chemical courage. I appreciate you coming. Friday evening. Yes. All right. The green room, where substances and nerves collided. Perhaps no other place in television history has seen as much pre-show anxiety as the green room on The Tonight Show, where guests waited before their appearances. According to a former Tonight Show talent coordinator, people are unaware of the pressure. Carson wasn't your average interviewer. Careers could be launched overnight with a good appearance. You could be haunted by a bad one for years. Additionally, Johnny desired real, spontaneous conversation as opposed to the heavily prepared, pre-planned talk show segments of today. Many were frightened by that. The ideal conditions for chemical support were produced by this pressure. Whether it was drugs from secret caches, alcohol from the well-stocked green room bar, or drugs brought by entourages who knew their well-known employers needed a pick-me-up. According to a staff member who worked on the show in the 1970s and 1980s, the green room bar was legendary. The choice was approved by Carson himself. Keep everything on top shelf. Although it was enforced with big stars, the unofficial rule was that 1 drink was okay and 2 was pushing it. Good luck. Beyond alcohol, many celebrities arrived having engaged in their favorite form of relaxation due to the era's more lenient stance toward recreational drugs. From prescription drugs to cocaine to marijuana, frequently in combinations that were made clear once the cameras started rolling. According to a television historian who specializes in late-night TV, you must keep the context in mind. Studio 54 was at its height at this time. Roman emperors were living like rock stars. Wall Street was a cocaine wash as well. There was more to The Tonight Show than meets the eye. It was a reflection of its era's culture, which included the widespread use of drugs in entertainment. Although he was renowned for being in control on air, Carson himself was known to enjoy a drink. When interviewing guests who weren't using the same restraint, this produced an intriguing dynamic. According to his former producer, John had this remarkable ability to modulate his approach based on a guest's state. He would gently lead someone through if they were a little drunk. He would make things seem natural by simplifying questions, guiding them along, and occasionally cutting parts short if they were actually impaired. The counterculture icon, whose chemical enhancement became part of his comedic persona, was the first of many guests who would test this adaptive approach during Carson's tenure by pushing the limits of broadcast acceptability. Into a new way of living that doesn't need me, so I can choose not to get up at all and still receive credit for the entire day if I so choose. The functional stoner, George Carlin. In the early 1970s, George Carlin changed his material, embraced the drug culture of the time, and grew his hair, transforming from a clean-cut comedian to a counterculture hero. His Tonight Show appearances showed these changes. He smiled like a stoner and riffed like a genius. Recalled a cameraman who did a lot of Carlin's Tonight Show work. No question ever arose. George didn't keep it to himself. By that time, his slightly glassy eyes were almost a trademark of his personality. Carlin became one of Carson's most dependable and well-liked guests after making more than 130 appearances on The Tonight Show. However, despite this seeming endorsement, Carson never chose him to be a guest host, something that many other comedians were able to do. According to a former Tonight Show writer, Johnny loved George and appreciated his genius. However, he refused to allow him to serve as a guest host. Reliability was the unstated explanation. Given George's way of life, Johnny wasn't sure he could manage the business for 90 minutes. Among our high-flying guests, Carlin stood out for his practicality. Regular viewers undoubtedly noticed Carlin's distinct relaxed vibe, but he remained professional, witty, and sharp, unlike others who became unruly or incoherent. According to a Tonight Show staffer who interacted closely with viewers, Carlin was what we called a functioning herbalist. He was unaffected by the weed. He did it as part of his creative process. He was still George Carlin, but in a more subdued, philosophical form. Carson's treatment of Carlin demonstrated his ability to adapt to the shifting social mores of the time. Carson changed his interview style, asking more open-ended questions that let Carlin's mind go in the intriguing, frequently humorous directions that made him a counterculture hero, without ever directly acknowledging Carlin's state on air. The former producer said Johnny knew exactly what he was doing. After giving George a topic, he sat back and let him riff. If George had been completely straight, the outcome would not have been the frequently brilliant stream of consciousness monologues that resulted. In his autobiography, Carlin later verified suspicions. Writing, "Did I typically get high when I was in the 1970s at Carson spots? I was, of course. I was George Carlin in the 1970s. Compute." Our next subject showed how easily things could go wrong when a brilliant mind substance use crossed the line from enhancement to impairment, but Carlin remained professional despite his chemical enhancement. "Thank you, my friend. All of them mean it. You are aware that I am unsure of where to begin. I don't. Firstly, how are you feeling? I sense the raw nerve of Richard Pryor's comedy. Exposed." Richard Pryor embodied something more volatile than Carlin, who stood for functional cannabis use. In the blink of an eye, a brilliant comedian whose substance abuse issues occasionally pushed Tonight's Show appearances from brilliant to concerning. According to a stage manager who worked on several of Pryor's Tonight Show appearances, he was hilarious until he got cosmic. As the world's wittiest and funniest person, Richard could launch a segment. Then all of a sudden, his eyes would shift, and his thoughts would wander. To get things back on track, Johnny would need to work like a traffic cop. Pryor had a complex and well-documented relationship with drugs. Throughout the 1970s, his use of cocaine in particular became more problematic, leading to his notorious 1980 accident involving freebasing. He was caught at various stages of this trajectory in a number of his Tonight Show appearances. One particularly noteworthy segment from 1978 began, predictably enough, with Pryor talking about his most recent endeavors. But halfway through, he started a joke about his early years, which slowly turned into a disjointed set of observations, his attention clearly straying. The audience chuckled uneasily, uncertain whether this was an unplanned or purposeful comedic decision. The stage manager went on, "You could see Johnny go into protection mode." To divert Richard's attention, he interrupted with a brief question, covered the awkward moment with a joke, and then seamlessly switched to a commercial. Under the guise of informal conversation, it was brilliant crisis management. Carson's handling of Pryor demonstrated his deep respect for the comedian's talent alongside concern for his well-being. Carson made an effort to highlight Pryor, in contrast to other hosts who might have made fun of an incompetent guest. At his peak while reducing his weak points. According to a former NBC executive with knowledge of their relationship, Johnny truly admired Richard's brilliance. He did not condemn the drugs. Carson was concerned about Richard destroying himself, but that wasn't his style. After especially erratic appearances, he would occasionally check in with him through mutual friends. The unpredictable nature of Pryor's high appearances set them apart from some of the others on our list. His talent persisted, but his concentration and filter grew progressively erratic, resulting in scenes that teetered on the thin line between comedy gold and broadcast anxiety. According to his former producer, Carson approached Richard in a different way. When the material was effective, he would let him fly. When not, he would build a safety net. Things began to go in a different direction. It was similar to observing a skilled animal trainer working with a large, erratic, and magnificent cat. Our next subject learned that Carson's patience had its limits when his impaired state went beyond being concerning to being unprofessional, despite his protective attitude toward talents like Pryor and Carlin. That night, there were 2 executions, and the entire process took roughly an hour and a half. Truman Capote, television disaster and literary genius. Comedians' controlled chaos isn't the only chemically enhanced Tonight Show appearance. Unexpected sources, such as the renowned literary figure whose 1980 appearance became legendary for all the wrong reasons, can occasionally produce the most frightening incidents. America's favorite book. Truman Capote's notorious Tonight Show disaster was, in the words of one production assistant, completely baked. Although Capote had made numerous appearances on the show over the years, typically showcasing his keen observations and witty wit that made him a talk show favorite, his appearance in January 1980 was different from the first time he stumbled onto the set. According to a sound technician who worked that evening, he was slurring so badly that it was difficult to understand him. He kept nodding his head forward before bringing himself back to the present with this shocked expression. There was panic in the control room. At least Johnny's reaction shots were coherent, so they continued to cut to them. Carson responded to Capote's condition in a markedly different way than he did to Carlin or Pryor, who both adjusted to their altered states with good humor. As he tried to save what was rapidly turning into an irreparable segment, viewers at home witnessed Carson's smile tighten and his questions become simpler. According to his former producer, Johnny was furious. Of course, not on the air. For that, he was too professional. However, he rushed backstage and yelled at the talent coordinator, "Never again," as soon as they cut to the commercial. "He's finished.